This isn't a story about a shipwreck, or a Cold War footnote, or a classified mission buried beneath the Pacific. This is a story about a moment when the world's most powerful nations stared into the abyss and decided to reach down into it and pull secrets from the darkness. Project Azorian was not simply an operation. It was a gamble so vast that it bent engineering, politics, espionage, and human ambition into a single fragile thread. A thread that, if broken, could have ignited a conflict capable of reshaping continents, rewriting alliances, and erasing millions of lives. Imagine it, a nuclear-armed Soviet submarine lying 3 miles beneath the ocean's surface. A CIA planned to steal it without anyone noticing. A billionaire's company used as a disguise, and an ocean wide enough to swallow every truth that governments wished to hide. This mission challenged the limits of physics, secrecy, and sanity. Its impact still echoes through intelligence agencies, naval warfare, and the very science of deep-sea exploration. And yet most people have never heard the real story. The stakes were immense, the consequences catastrophic, the audacity almost unbelievable. Before you settle in, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Shadow and Silk for more dark history. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Phone away, distractions silenced. Let's begin. Our story begins not in the Cold War, nor in the steel corridors of the CIA, but in the ancient relationship humanity has always held with the sea. Long before nations existed, before borders hardened, before espionage became a profession, the ocean was the first frontier of mystery. Every civilization that gazed upon its horizon understood the same truth. The sea hides more than it reveals. It keeps secrets, swallows machines, and buries ambitions beneath pressure that crushes mountains. The first chapter of this story takes us to the shores of early Mesopotamia. Around 2500 BCE, sailors of the Akkadian world spoke of waters so deep that no line could reach the bottom. Clay tablets tell of the black places where the sun never shines, a poetic but eerily accurate description of the abyssal plains. Their boats skimmed only the surface, yet their myths claimed powerful spirits lived in the darkness below. Even then, humanity sensed that the ocean was more than a landscape. It was a vault. Centuries later, in ancient Greece, the philosopher Anaximander proposed a radical idea that beneath the waves stretched realms unknown, regions unreachable to any living creature. Greek sponge divers, plunging 80 to 100 feet on a single breath, returned with stories of sudden cold, crushing silence, and an irreversible pull downward. When they described these sensations, they always emphasized the same detail. The deep was indifferent. It accepted whatever fell into it, whether treasure, tools, or men. While these early Mediterranean cultures speculated about the deep, the Polynesians mastered the surface with a precision unmatched for a millennium. By the 1st century CE, navigators in the Pacific were reading star paths, wave patterns, and bird migrations with scientific accuracy. Yet even among their sophisticated lore, the trench regions of the open ocean formed a taboo. The abyss, they believed, was a realm where the spirits of the drowned wandered forever. They warned their children never to speak loudly over deep water for fear the abyss would answer back. But the ancient kingdom that came closest to understanding the deep was China during the Han Dynasty. Around 100 CE, early naturalists documented strange observations, pressure increasing with depth, the silence beneath the waves, and the curious phenomenon of weighted baskets disappearing into darkness until the ropes snapped from force. They called the deeper zones the dragon's domain, believing no vessel forged by human hands could survive the descent. While all this was happening, another civilization, the Romans, pushed practical engineering far beyond their contemporaries. Their military divers, the Uranotores, repaired underwater pilings using tools weighted with lead. They reached perhaps 30 meters, an impressive but still shallow descent. The Romans, with all their engineering brilliance, built aqueducts that spanned continents but could not fathom the world below their fleets. To them, the deep ocean was not territory. It was oblivion. But something changed in the Middle Ages. As maritime trade networks expanded, so too did the number of shipwrecks. In the records of the Abbasid Caliphate around the 9th century, scholars wrote of storms pulling entire fleets into chasms beneath the waves. Sailors described hearing groaning noises from the deep during calm nights, a phenomenon we now know as seafloor tectonic activity. For them, it was the sound of the ocean thinking. A millennium passed in this way, humans skimming the surface while the deep kept its secrets. But by the 1500s, the age of exploration forced a new question onto the world's stage. Could the ocean be measured? Could it be known? The second chapter of this early saga leads us to Ferdinand Magellan's circumnavigation in 1520. His crew noted soundings in the Pacific that yielded no bottom, even with ropes over 700 meters long. These failures left a profound psychological mark on European sailors. The maps of the age labeled such regions mare profundum, the profound sea. The term profound wasn't just descriptive, it meant unknowable. Meanwhile, Japanese records from the Edo period described fishing nets torn apart by forces too strong to see. In Inu legends, the deep held great armored serpents. Even the Inuit of the Arctic believed the deepest waters were ruled by Setna, the mother of the sea who dragged the drowned into her cold domain. Across continents, cultures arrived independently at the same conclusion. The deep ocean is where things disappear. And disappearing, quietly and forever, would one day become the key to understanding Project Azorian. By the 18th century, as Enlightenment thinkers sought to categorize the natural world, the deep ocean still resisted every attempt at explanation. Captain James Cook, during his second Pacific voyage, dropped weighted lines more than a mile deep and still failed to touch bottom. His journals recorded a curious mix of scientific frustration and awe. "We know less of the sea," he wrote, "than of the moon." Major turning points arrived in the 19th century. Steam power, iron hulls, and industrial cable-laying projects forced humanity to confront ocean depth with unprecedented precision. The laying of the first transatlantic telegraph cable in 1858 required mapping the mid-Atlantic ridge. Engineers discovered the abyssal plains, vast silent deserts of mud, stretching for thousands of miles. The scale shocked them. The depth unnerved them. Soon after, the HMS Challenger expedition of 1872 to 1876 transformed oceanography from speculation into science. Its crew measured depths of over 8,000 meters. They dredged strange creatures from the darkness, pale, eyeless, fragile beings adapted to crushing pressures. The scientific world reacted with fascination and dread. One naturalist described these specimens as ghosts of a kingdom unseen. Yet, as researchers began to learn what lay beneath, another community paid even closer attention. The militaries of rising industrial nations. The story now shifts toward steel, coal, and empire. Submarines, crude, experimental, and dangerously unstable, began to appear in naval programs. The American Civil War saw the Confederate submarine H.L. Hunley dive into Charleston Harbor in 1864, never to resurface alive. It was an omen. The ocean accepts the machines of war as readily as ships or men. By the early 20th century, submarines evolved into strategic weapons. Germany's U-boats prowled the Atlantic during World War I, turning the deep into a new theater of conflict. Dozens of submarines vanished without explanation, swallowed by pressure and darkness. Naval archives filled with coordinates marked simply as lost with all hands. But the real transformation came during World War II. Submarines became nuclear-era precursors, equipped with advanced torpedoes, sonar, and communication systems. The ocean was no longer just a barrier. It was a hiding place. Beneath thousands of meters of cold water, nations could conceal vessels capable of reshaping global power. Yet this shift also produced a new kind of tragedy. Submariners who perished were often unrecoverable. Their steel tombs became permanent fixtures of the abyss. In 1944, the USS Temps was lost in the Formosa Strait. In 1945, the Japanese submarine I-52 sank in the Atlantic while carrying gold and codebooks. Each wreck became both a grave and a secret. And this brings us to the moment when the deep ocean, for the first time in history, became an arena for espionage. As the Cold War dawned, the world's most powerful nations confronted a new and terrifying reality. Submarines armed with nuclear missiles could disappear into the ocean, strike without warning, and vanish again. Surveillance satellites could track aircraft. Radar could detect ships, but nothing could see through 3 miles of seawater. While scientists had spent centuries trying to understand the deep, intelligence agencies realized they could weaponize its invisibility. And in that realization lay the seed of Project Azorian. But before a covert mission could attempt to raise a lost submarine from the floor of the Pacific Ocean, the world first had to learn how submarines failed, how they sank, and how their wrecks could reshape the balance of global power. The story of the deep was no longer mythic, spiritual, or speculative. It had become geopolitical. It had become mathematical. It had become a shadowed frontier where silence equaled advantage. As we move forward from these ancient and early histories toward the modern era, the sea remains unchanged, vast, indifferent, merciless, while humanity becomes bolder, more fearful, and more ambitious. For generations, we believed that whatever fell into the deep would be gone forever. The CIA in the coming chapters would attempt to prove otherwise. But then, something changed. The ancient relationship between humanity and the deep ocean shifted from awe to strategy. By the mid-20th century, the sea was no longer a boundary. It was a battlefield, a hiding place, and a vast realm where nations could bury their intentions beneath layers of darkness and water. The world would never be the same after the Cold War taught governments that silence, especially submarine silence, could decide the fate of continents. The second chapter reveals a new, calculated interest in the abyss. When the Soviet Union launched its first nuclear submarine, the K-3 Leninsky Komsomol in 1957, a geopolitical tremor rippled across the globe. Nuclear propulsion meant a submarine could remain submerged for months, crossing oceans without surfacing, invisible to satellites and almost undetectable by sonar. The United States responded with urgency, commissioning vessels like the USS Nautilus, the first nuclear-powered submarine to reach the North Pole beneath the ice. These advancements transformed naval warfare into a chess match played in total darkness. Hundreds of meters below the surface, steel giants glided silently, each capable of unleashing destruction unimaginable only a generation earlier. Submarines carrying ballistic missiles became the ultimate deterrent, protected not by armor but by depth. However, the deeper submarines traveled, the more catastrophic their failures became. When a ship sinks on the surface, it leaves survivors, debris, and logs of its final moments. But when a submarine sinks in the open ocean, it leaves little but mystery. It was in this climate of uncertainty that intelligence agencies began to ask a dangerous question. If a submarine vanished, what secrets disappeared with it? Moving into the early years of the Cold War, military strategists grasped a chilling truth. A sunken nuclear submarine wasn't merely a tragedy, it was a library of classified technology encryption devices, missile guidance systems, nuclear warheads, acoustic signatures, and the psychological maps of naval doctrine. Whoever reached the wreck first could reshape the balance of power. The United States and the Soviet Union both knew this, and so a silent race began. By the 1960s, oceanography had merged with espionage. The advent of deep-sea research vessels such as the bathyscaphe Trieste, which descended nearly 11,000 meters into the Mariana Trench in 1960, proved that humans could withstand the pressure of the deep with the right engineering. The world watched in astonishment as Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh reported the pitch-black stillness of the Challenger Deep. Their mission was scientific, but intelligence agencies saw something else, a demonstration that the deepest places on Earth were no longer unreachable. While scientists celebrated, naval officers whispered, if a vessel could go down, then a vessel could go down with purpose. As the United States built better sonar networks, vast arrays stretching across the Atlantic and Pacific, engineers discovered that submarine wrecks created distinct acoustic shadows. These shadows, detectable only through classified systems, became the earliest breadcrumb trail to finding lost underwater vessels. And just as this technology emerged, fate delivered an event that would shift everything. On March 8, 1968, the Soviet ballistic missile submarine K-129 departed from Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky for a routine patrol. It carried 3 nuclear-armed missiles, advanced cryptographic equipment, and a crew of 98 men. Somewhere in the vastness of the Pacific, the submarine vanished. For months, the Soviet Navy searched fruitlessly, sweeping thousands of miles with aircraft and ships, but the ocean revealed nothing. No oil slick, no debris, no signal. The Soviets eventually declared the vessel lost with all hands. For them, it was a tragedy. For the CIA, it was something far more dangerous, an opportunity. The United States had one crucial advantage, an underwater acoustic surveillance network so sensitive it could hear a submarine hull collapse under the pressure of the abyss. Analysts traced a faint signature to a region roughly 1,500 miles northwest of Hawaii. If the Soviets still believed their submarine was in a different part of the ocean, the Americans alone knew the truth. But knowledge was not possession. The depth at the wreck site was approximately 16,500 feet, over 3 miles down. No salvage vessel on Earth had ever lifted anything from such depths, let alone a 2,000-ton ballistic missile submarine. Engineers insisted it was impossible. Physicists warned that even the smallest structural miscalculation would cause catastrophic failure. Naval historians argued that the submarine would crumble into fragments, too delicate to move. But intelligence officers countered with a single, potent question. What if we succeed? As the Cold War intensified, both nations raced for technological supremacy. Rockets, satellites, nuclear reactors, encryption systems, stealth coatings. Every advancement created equal fear and ambition in the opposing camp. A captured submarine could unravel decades of Soviet secret development, or confirm to a devastating degree its vulnerabilities. While this tension grew, engineers at the CIA quietly studied the ocean floor. They analyzed sediment density, water temperature, gradients, and how long radioactive materials might remain stable at such pressure. They reviewed every deep-sea salvage attempt in history, each one shallow and primitive compared to what they imagined. But the goal was clear: raise a submarine from the bottom of the sea without alerting the nation to whom it belonged. Here, the story turns toward the minds who shaped the mission. One name stands out: John Parangosky, a high-ranking CIA officer known for managing the agency's most technically complex covert projects. He had overseen operations involving satellites, reconnaissance aircraft, and experimental surveillance systems. To him, difficulty was not a deterrent, it was a challenge. Colleagues described him as calm, calculating, and almost unnervingly patient. Working alongside him was David Sharp, another key CIA figure. Sharp's later memoirs described the Azorian project as a fusion of engineering and audacity unmatched in the agency's history. He believed, as did Parangosky, that impossible missions were often the ones with the highest payoff. Meanwhile, on the scientific front, engineers from major American contracting companies studied the metallurgy of submarine hulls, the effects of deposition currents, and the stress limits of heavy-lift platforms. They calculated that lifting the submarine required claw-like steel capture arms capable of withstanding forces exceeding 4 million pounds. The operation would need a ship longer than a football field, with a moon pool, an internal chamber where the submarine could be hidden from view during retrieval. But designing such a ship raised another problem: secrecy. How does a nation build the world's largest salvage vessel without drawing attention to it? As planning progressed, the stakes escalated. The Soviets, unaware of the wreck's true location, continued searching blindly across the northern Pacific. If they discovered American interests in that region, the operation would collapse before it began. The United States needed a cover story so elaborate, so convincing, that not even foreign intelligence agencies would question it. At this moment, the CIA turned to a man celebrated for his wealth, ingenuity, and reputation for pursuing the impossible. Billionaire Howard Hughes. His company's involvement would make the cover believable, even elegant. Hughes had built aircraft that defied engineering norms, funded geological research, and invested heavily in mining ventures. A new deep-sea mining project attributed to his name would raise no alarms. Thus, the agency began crafting a legend, a public-facing narrative that would explain the sudden appearance of a colossal ship in the middle of the Pacific. They claimed that Hughes was developing a vessel to harvest manganese nodules from the seafloor, a valuable mineral source for industrial metals. Newspapers reported the story without question. Scientists debated its potential. Investors speculated. It worked. But beneath this innocent explanation, the real transformation was unfolding. The CIA was preparing to build the Hughes Glomar Explorer, a ship that would attempt what no nation had ever dared, lifting a lost Soviet nuclear submarine from the abyss under the disguise of private industry. However, even as construction began, the agency could not escape a growing fear. The deeper they descended into engineering and planning, the clearer the risks became. A single miscalculation, a wave too strong, a current too swift. A structural failure to sudden could scatter Soviet nuclear warheads across the Pacific seafloor, ignite an international crisis, or expose the operation to global scrutiny. Optimism existed, but so did a shadow. The Cold War was a realm defined by brinkmanship, and Project Azorian was the physical embodiment of that philosophy, a mission poised between genius and catastrophe. The ocean, silent and indifferent as ever, waited to see which it would be. As we transition toward the next chapter, the pieces of the operation are now in motion. A lost submarine resting in darkness, a team of engineers designing machines that defy the known limits of physics, and an intelligence agency preparing to gamble its credibility, its secrecy, and possibly the stability of the world on a single unprecedented lift. What happened next would shock the world, though. For many years, almost no one outside a handful of intelligence offices knew the truth. The crisis did not begin with the lift, nor with the ship, nor with the secret planning rooms in Langley. It began with the terrible, irreversible silence of the K-129 itself. When submarines die, they do so quietly. Pressure overtakes steel. Circuits fail. Voices are lost before distress calls can rise. And somewhere, families wait for sailors who will never return. The disappearance of the K-129 created a vacuum of fear within the Soviet Navy. Officers who once believed their vessels were nearly invulnerable now questioned every weld, every valve, every sonar reading. Admiral Vladimir Krugliakov, one of the most respected commanders of the submarine force, pushed his staff relentlessly for answers. Why did the submarine fail? Why was there no emergency signal? Why didn't anyone stop it? The official explanation, catastrophic mechanical failure, satisfied no one. Rumors circulated among officers and crew. Perhaps an explosion occurred. Perhaps a collision. Perhaps an accident involving one of the nuclear-armed missiles? Some whispered even darker possibilities. Sabotage, espionage, betrayal. The most unsettling truth was the simplest. They did not know. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, CIA analysts studied the acoustic signature of the submarine's final moments. The recording revealed a sequence of metallic groans, the unmistakable crush of steel under immense pressure, and then a void, It suggested the vessel had imploded, but even this did not explain why it failed. The Americans, like the Soviets, were left with questions. By late 1968, the CIA had dispatched a covert surveillance submarine, the USS Halibut, to search the Pacific seafloor for the wreck. Its mission was classified at the highest level. Its navigation logs were sealed. Its crew received orders so strict that some later admitted they never fully understood what they had participated in. The journey was grueling. For weeks, the Halibut crawled slowly across the ocean floor, dragging sonar arrays and deep-sea cameras behind it. Men worked in near-total darkness, sustained by caffeine, nerves, and the cold knowledge that they were monitoring the grave of nearly 100 Soviet sailors. Then, after thousands of miles of scanning, the cameras captured something unmistakable: a shattered hull resting on the seabed, split into massive sections. The wreckage lay twisted and broken, silent as a tomb. The first images stunned the CIA. The submarine's bow was crushed inward. The missile compartment was fractured. The aft section appeared largely intact. The debris field stretched hundreds of feet, and yet, amid this destruction, instruments, warheads, and code materials might still be recoverable. But beneath the technical excitement rested a human truth. Dozens of sailors still lay inside. In later years, analysts would remember the uncomfortable tension in the room when the first photographs were reviewed. The mission was a technical marvel. It was also, inescapably, a descent into a graveyard. As the CIA refined its plans, the broader atmosphere of the Cold War intensified. The Vietnam War raged. The Prague Spring had been crushed. Brezhnev expanded Soviet nuclear forces. Washington responded with new strategic doctrines. The world's two superpowers were circling each other, suspicious, exhausted, and increasingly paranoid. In such an environment, the loss of a submarine carried consequences far beyond the human tragedy. It represented vulnerability, the one thing neither side could publicly admit, and this vulnerability was not unique to the Soviets. In 1963, the USS Thresher, the most advanced American nuclear submarine of its time, sank during deep diving tests, killing all 129 people aboard. The implosion occurred so quickly that, according to acoustic analysis, the pressure hull collapsed in under a second. Families received little explanation. The Navy was left shaken. 5 years later, in 1968, the same year the K-129 was lost, another American submarine, the USS Scorpion vanished in the Atlantic with 99 sailors. Theories ranged from torpedo malfunction to internal explosion. To this day, its final moments remain debated. These tragedies struck both nations deeply. Submariners understood the risks of their profession, but the public often did not. Politicians demanded explanations. Engineers feared reputational collapse. Intelligence agencies saw opportunity and danger. If the Soviets discovered that the United States planned to retrieve their submarine, the consequences could be catastrophic. It would be an act of technological theft, espionage, and desecration, all wrapped in a single operation. Retaliation could erupt across multiple regions. Diplomatic relations could implode. Military escalation could follow. Yet, if the CIA succeeded, the intelligence windfall would be extraordinary. They would gain access to Soviet nuclear missile design, encrypted communication systems, operational procedures, and possibly the internal workings of the submarine's nuclear propulsion. Such knowledge could rewrite strategic planning for a decade. The pressure on the operation mounted. Political leaders debated behind locked doors. Admirals expressed both fascination and dread. Engineers raised concerns about currents, sediment, and the risk of structural collapse during the lift. Every warning carried real weight. But amid these technical and political debates, the human stories continued quietly in the background. One widow of the K-129 crew, living in Vladivostok, visited the waterfront every morning for years, waiting for the impossible. She carried a photograph of her husband, a radio operator, folded into her coat, worn soft from handling. In later interviews, she said the sea took him without a sound. Her grief was private, but shared by dozens of families across the Soviet Union. In the United States, former submarine commander Chester Chet Buchanan, interviewed decades later, recalled the eerie calm that fell over intelligence offices when images of the wreck appeared for the first time. It felt, he said, like staring into a place we weren't meant to look. These human vignettes scattered across continents reveal the emotional undercurrent beneath the geopolitical storm. Submarines represented power, but they also carried fathers, sons, brothers, and friends. And when they sank, no military strategy could mend the hole left behind. As the Glomar Explorer neared completion, the scope of the operation grew heavier. Engineers calculated the risk of sediment destabilizing the submarine during the lift. They estimated pressures that would tear steel apart like paper if even one hydraulic system faltered. Military analysts warned that Soviet spy trawlers frequently patrolled the region. Diplomats cautioned that any hint of American interference with a Soviet wreck could ignite a crisis. But the mission pressed forward. The crisis deepened when intelligence officers discovered that Soviet surveillance vessels had begun monitoring Hughes' corporate activities. Whether by coincidence or suspicion, the Soviets appeared increasingly aware that something unusual was taking place. Their trawlers lingered near the projected mission zone. Their satellites tracked offshore construction. Their radio operators intercepted unusual frequencies. And yet no one could prove what the Americans were planning. The operation entered a new phase 1 defined by tension, uncertainty, and the quiet acknowledgement that this mission might decide far more than the fate of a single submarine. The deeper we descend into the story, the more the ocean becomes a mirror for human ambition. Pressure builds, darkness thickens, secrets lie waiting in the cold. And all the while, the world above continues to turn, unaware that two superpowers are now entangled in a silent contest 3 miles below the surface. As the stage shifts toward the execution of the mission, we stand on the edge of a precipice. Machines are ready, the ship is built, crews are trained, the wreck is mapped. The stormfronts of geopolitics gather overhead, and soon the CIA will attempt something no nation has dared before. But the ocean, indifferent and eternal, will have the final say. As we approach the modern age of this story, the world enters the early 1970s, an era shaped by covert operations, shifting alliances, and technological leaps that altered the dynamics of global power. The Vietnam War dragged onward. The Watergate scandal brewed quietly in the background. The Soviet Union fortified its military presence across continents, and in the shadows, Project Azorian moved from blueprint to reality. The Hughes Glomar Explorer, now complete, was unlike any vessel the world had ever seen. Its hull stretched over 600 feet long, its internal moon pool yawed open like a hidden cavern. Beneath the ship, a massive mechanical system, the capture vehicle waited to descend miles into the ocean. Engineers had built it to grasp the submarine's hull with steel fingers the size of telephone poles. Even to those who worked on it, the mechanism seemed almost mythical in scale. But outwardly, the ship presented itself as a mining vessel. Hughes's public persona as an eccentric billionaire provided perfect camouflage. His name drew attention, but his secrecy prevented questions. Journalists who might have investigated were reassured that the operation concerned nothing more than a bold experiment in ocean mining. Investors took the story at face value. Even many of the ship's crew believed the cover narrative. However, beneath the public facade, the atmosphere aboard the Glomar Explorer was different. CIA technicians operated discreetly. Naval intelligence officers read classified memos in sealed rooms. Protocols restricted movement between departments. Conversations were brief. Every action was monitored. The ship felt both alive with purpose and haunted by uncertainty. As the vessel departed Long Beach, California in June 1974, few onshore observers realized they were witnessing the beginning of one of the most ambitious covert missions in history. The ship sailed westward across thousands of miles of open ocean, its steel hull creaking softly as swells rolled beneath it. The crew settled into their routines, half aware, half curious, and wholly unable to see the enormity of what lay ahead. When the ship reached the target zone, a hush settled across its decks. Beneath them lay the shattered remains of the K-129, resting in near-freezing water under pressures greater than those found inside a nuclear reactor. The Pacific stretched endlessly in every direction. No land was visible. The horizon shimmered with heat by day, dissolved into darkness by night. This isolation was deliberate. Surveillance would be difficult. Observation, unlikely. But even here, alone on the open ocean, they were not entirely unseen. Soviet surveillance ships, small, rusting vessels packed with radio equipment and binocular-wielding officers began lingering at the edge of visual range. Whether by coincidence or subtle instinct, the Soviets watched the Explorer with steady, silent interest. Their presence tightened the tension aboard the CIA vessel. Every day risked exposure. Every hour risked suspicion. Yet the operation continued. The descent of the capture vehicle began with quiet ceremony. Engineers initiated hydraulic systems. Heavy lift cables unspooled slowly, disappearing into the sea. The machinery groaned under immense strain as the steel structure began its 3-mile journey toward the ocean floor. For 8 hours, the crew monitored its progress, adjusting tension, measuring torque, checking for any sign of malfunction. At last, the system reached the seafloor. Far below the ship, in total darkness, cameras revealed the outline of the submarine. It lay broken across the sediment, tilted at an angle, its once powerful hull bent by pressure. Silt drifted across it like dust in an abandoned room. The scene, captured for the first time by human eyes, felt almost sacred. A grave untouched for 6 years, now disturbed by hands that had never known the men buried within. The capture vehicle slowly maneuvered into place, aligning its massive claws with the submarine's upper hull. The process took hours, each movement measured by millimeters. Operators watched monitors with steady concentration, adjusting angles, correcting drift. A single mistake would scatter the wreck into fragments, and then, finally, the claws closed. For the first time since 1968, the K-129 felt the pull of the world above. The lift began slowly. Engineers increased tension across multiple lines, each capable of carrying millions of pounds. Hydraulic systems groaned, steel cables vibrated. The ship rose and fell with rolling swells, sending tremors thousands of meters down the lift system. Inside the control room, every click of every monitor seemed deafening. But the operation, at least initially, progressed well. The submarine ascended through darkness, inch by inch, the pressure around it decreasing. The crew dared to hope. Some allowed themselves to imagine the intelligence windfall. Others focused only on the mechanics, afraid of dreaming too far ahead. However, the ocean had other plans. At roughly 9,000 feet, halfway to the surface, sensors detected a sudden jolt. Tension spiked along the lift lines. Warning lights flashed. Operators shouted instructions over the noise of machinery. Something was wrong. The steel claws had encountered stresses that exceeded their design. Analysts later theorized that the submarine's hull, weakened by years of deep-sea pressure, began to fracture. The weight distribution shifted abruptly, placing enormous strain on the capture vehicle. And then, without warning, a portion of the submarine broke away. The moment passed in silence. There was no dramatic explosion, no eruption of debris, just a sudden drop in weight, and the quiet realization that a critical section of the submarine had slipped from the claws, falling back into the abyss. Back on the Glomar Explorer, the mood changed instantly. Engineers reviewed telemetry in shock. CIA officers exchanged stunned glances. Naval intelligence personnel understood at once what had been lost. Code materials, ballistic missile components, and possibly nuclear warheads tumbled beyond recovery. But some parts of the submarine remained secured in the capture vehicle. The lift continued. When the wreckage finally reached the moon pool, the ship sealed its massive doors, blocking any outside view. Inside, crews worked with solemn precision, removing debris, tagging artifacts, documenting every detail. What they recovered is still debated. Official reports remain classified in places. Some sources claim sections of the submarine's sonar, missile guidance systems, and cryptographic equipment were retrieved. Others insist the hull was smaller and less consequential, but among the debris they found something else: human remains. The ship fell silent, as divers and technicians carefully lifted fragments of the submarine's interior. Bones, fabric, metal, the quiet remnants of men who had died without warning, buried in a place no one could reach until now. For all the political ambition of the mission, this moment brought everything back to its human core. 98 men had perished in darkness. Now fragments of their final chapter rested in the hands of strangers. In an unexpected gesture, the CIA conducted a burial at sea for the recovered remains, filmed it, and later, decades later, provided the footage to Russia. The ceremony was simple and respectful, accompanied by a reading of a naval prayer. The Pacific received the sailors once again. Above the water, though, the mission remained vulnerable. Soviet trawlers continued circling. At times, they drifted dangerously close. Some American crew members feared the Soviets would deploy divers or attempt sabotage. Others believed the trawlers were simply observing, waiting for a mistake. Yet through all of this, the cover story held. No alarms were raised. No confrontation occurred. The mission, despite its failures and complications, remained hidden. But in the United States, political storms gathered. The Watergate scandal grew. Journalists began digging into unusual corporate filings connected to Howard Hughes. Reporters approached former contractors for comment. Rumors spread. By 1975, the truth was ready to surface, not in the ocean, but in newspapers. When the press finally revealed the existence of the mission, the CIA adopted a phrase that became legendary: "We can neither confirm nor deny." This response, originally crafted for Project Azorian, evolved into a standard phrase for secret government operations. It shaped public discourse, legal precedent, and journalistic language for decades. Yet beyond the politics, beyond the secrecy, the mission had deeper consequences. It demonstrated that nations were willing to challenge the ocean itself to protect their interests. It proved that technology could reach depths once thought unreachable. And it whispered a quiet, unsettling truth. The deep sea was no longer a place of myth. It was a battlefield. As the Cold War moved into the 1980s, the technology born from Project Azorian influenced deep-sea drilling, salvage operations, and underwater surveillance. Governments invested in remotely operated vehicles, acoustic mapping systems, and advanced submersible architecture. The abyss had changed from a frontier of mystery into a landscape for intelligence work. But the mission also left behind ethical wounds. Questions lingered. Debates grew. The legacy of those lost at sea remained unresolved. And yet, the story continued, carried forward by the momentum of secrecy, discovery, and ambition. As we step into the contemporary period, we see how this covert operation echoes through modern policy, international law, and even the way we understand the ocean itself. The shadow cast by Project Azorian did not vanish. It stretched into the present day. Today, we still grapple with the legacy of Project Azorian, not because of its engineering triumphs, nor even because of its failures, but because the operation revealed something deeper about the modern world, a truth about secrecy, ambition, and the quiet competition that continues beneath the surface of global politics. In the decades after the mission, the ocean floor became a stage for new technologies. Nations developed remotely operated vehicles capable of exploring trenches and inspecting wrecks unreachable in the 1970s. Autonomous drones now glide through the depths, mapping the seabed with extraordinary clarity. The rise of fiber optic communication cables drew strategic attention, turning the deep sea into an arena where information rather than minerals or weapons became the most valuable resource. In this shifting landscape, the story of Azorian resurfaced constantly as a reference point. Intelligence agencies studied its methods, naval architects admired its engineering, legal scholars debated the international implications of raising another nation's warship from the seabed. Environmental scientists examined its role in shaping public awareness of deep-sea environments. Quietly, steadily, its influence spread across disciplines that seemed unrelated at first glance. The early 2000s brought renewed attention when declassified documents revealed the extent of the mission's ambition and the scale of its costs, financial, political, and human. Discussions opened in academic circles. Documentaries revisited the events. Journalists reevaluated the Cold War context. The mission, once buried beneath secrecy, began to breathe in the public consciousness, and yet much remained unknown. The precise intelligence recovered, the details of the submarine's final mission, the full account of discussions within the CIA, the White House, and the Pentagon. Even today, pages remain redacted, sealed behind the familiar justification of national security. But the ocean does not hide its stories forever. Advances in underwater imaging allowed independent researchers to revisit the wreck site. Expeditions confirmed the massive scar left by the salvage attempt, a quiet reminder of the moment when human ambition reached down and touched a place few had ever imagined accessible. The wreck itself, now fractured and partially collapsed, has become both a historical landmark and a solemn reminder of the men who died there. Meanwhile, the geopolitical world continues to evolve in ways shaped by the same forces that gave birth to Project Azorian. Nations invest heavily in submarine fleets equipped with quieter propulsion, advanced sonar evasion systems, and increasingly sophisticated nuclear payloads. The abyss remains the hidden frontier of military power. The United States, Russia, China, and several other countries now engage in deep-sea monitoring campaigns, deploying sensors, autonomous vehicles, and surveillance systems across vast underwater territories. These efforts echo the motivations of the 1970s: the need to know, the need to anticipate, and the fear of unseen threats lurking beneath the waves. Contemporary debates also draw from Azorian's legacy. Should nations have the right to salvage foreign military wrecks? Does a submarine resting in international waters still belong to the country that built it? Do families of lost sailors deserve full disclosure? Or does secrecy serve a greater strategic purpose? International law struggles to answer these questions. Diplomats offer interpretations, historians provide context, but the ocean remains indifferent, its boundaries fluid, its depths unclaimed. Recent events underline this uncertainty. Incidents involving unidentified underwater drones, reports of communication, cable tampering, rising tensions in the Arctic where melting ice opens new pathways for submarines. Each development echoes the quiet tensions of the Cold War reshaped for the 21st century. And yet, amid all this complexity, Project Azorian continues to stand alone, not as a failure, not as a success, but as a moment when technological ambition collided with human vulnerability, revealing the precarious balance between exploration and intrusion. When the burial Lhotse footage of the K-129 sailors was released in 1992, families in Russia watched with quiet emotion. Some wept at the unexpected respect shown by their former adversaries. Others felt conflicted. Their loved ones had been found, but the circumstances of that discovery had been hidden for decades. Yet the gesture reminded the world that beneath uniforms, beneath ideologies, beneath the machinery of war, there were lives that mattered. As the 21st century unfolds, this human dimension sits at the heart of the conversation. Submarines still patrol the world's oceans, carrying crews who operate in silence, trusting their vessels, fearing the depths. The abyss remains the same, cold, vast, unmoved by the ambitions of nations. But the story of Project Azorian endures because it bridges the past and the present. It shows us how far we are willing to push the limits of engineering to gain an advantage. It exposes the lengths to which governments will go to protect secrecy. And it reminds us that even the deepest waters cannot forever conceal the truths placed within them. The mission exists now as a kind of echo, a reminder that history's most extraordinary stories are often the ones almost no one was allowed to witness. But like the ocean itself, they rise slowly into view, pulled upward by time, memory, and curiosity. And today, as we reflect on the legacy of this operation, we see clearly that the story has not ended. It continues in classified programs, in modern exploration, in geopolitical strategy, and in our collective understanding of the deep. The ocean holds its silence, but history whispers through it. And Project Azorian remains one of the darkest, most fascinating whispers of all. In the quiet moments at the end of this story, we find ourselves returning to the beginning, to the ancient belief that the sea is a place where mysteries sleep. For thousands of years, humanity has looked out across the water and wondered what lies beneath. Some feared it, some worshipped it, some attempted to measure it, and a few, driven by ambition or desperation, tried to claim the secrets hidden in its darkness. Project Azorian was one of these attempts, a mission born from rivalry, shaped by ingenuity, and carried out in silence. Yet beneath its technical brilliance and political urgency lies something far more timeless. The reminder that every great endeavor touches the fragile boundary between what can be done and what should be done. As we look back across the centuries, from ancient sailors who whispered about the deep, to engineers who built machines strong enough to touch it, we follow a single thread of human desire, the desire to understand, to control, to lift the unknown into the light. But the ocean teaches us gently, through every triumph and every failure, that not all mysteries yield easily. The men who perished aboard the K-129 became part of the sea long before the world learned their story. Their lives, like the lives of countless sailors across history, remind us that the deep is not merely a frontier. It is a keeper of memory, a silent witness to both human brilliance and human tragedy. And in honoring them, we honor everyone lost in the vastness of our planet's last great wilderness. When we trace the path of this operation from the ancient myths of the deep, through the cold war's shadows into the technologies of the modern age, we see how each chapter reflects our evolving relationship with the unknown. We explore it, we fear it, we challenge it, and eventually we learn from it. Tonight, as this story settles into stillness, we are left with a simple truth. The ocean is patient. It outlasts empires, governments, and missions. It swallows secrets and returns them slowly, piece by piece, as the years unfold. The story of Project Azorian is one of those pieces, a reminder of how far we once reached into the depths, and how those depths answered with silence. But our journey does not end here. The sea continues to shape our future. New technologies descend into places we once believed unreachable. Nations still circle one another beneath the waves. And the mysteries of the deep, though quieter now, remain endless. The story continues, carried forward by curiosity, by caution, and by the quiet understanding that even the darkest waters reflect something human back at us. So take one last breath with the rhythm of the tide. Let the weight of history settle gently around you, and allow the silence of the ocean to guide you into rest. Good night.